Today is August 1st, 2006. We're doing another oral history interview. I'm Charles Lundquist. Today our interviewee is Jim Odom. Jim, it's delightful to have you here today.
Thank you, Chuck.
Perhaps you could start out by telling a little bit about where you spent your youth, where you got educated, and how you got into the space program.
All right. I grew up in a little town called McKenzie, Alabama, down in the southern part of the state. I grew up on a farm. Went to the local high school. It was a county high school. There were 17 of us, including my wife and I, that graduated in our senior class. So it was a very small school. But we were very blessed with some excellent teachers. There is where I really got interested in math and science, just because of the extraordinary teachers that we had in this county school. Graduated from high school there in '51. I went to Troy State to a pre-engineering course for 2 years, primarily because it was more economical and I could work at home on the weekends. And I finished that 2 years and then transferred to Auburn. There I graduated in 1955 in mechanical engineering. And as soon as that was over, I was, at the time I was going to Auburn, was during the Korean War, and I was receiving deferments each quarter. I never really knew if I was going to get to go the next quarter. And I left, did graduate from Auburn in August of '55, but my wife and I married in my senior year at Auburn. She was June Peavy. She had gone to St. Margaret's nursing and went through 3 years straight, and she finished a year before I did. And we were married, and she worked at Lee County Hospital in Auburn. On graduation, I interviewed several companies. Jobs were pretty easy at that time. And I took the job that I chose was within Chemstrand in Decatur, Alabama. And there, it was a good job. I worked 6 months, and my home draft board drafted me. And I was drafted in early '56, and went through basic training. And
Where did you do basic training?
I did it in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, in real early spring. It was interesting. And from here on is my life was absolutely nothing that I planned. It was when I look back, and I'll explain this in a moment. When I look back, the only significant choices I made was who I was going to marry, where I was going to school, and the first job. From then on, it was absolutely out of my control, and it was a function of the time and the industry that we ended up in. When I was home on leave from basic training, I was renting a house from a man that was a personnel director of one of the labs at then ABMA.
Oh, really?
And he asked me while I was home if I would like to come to Huntsville and work for ABMA. And fortunately, my wife was staying in Decatur, and I said, absolutely yes. So my assignment from the Army was to an engineering division at Fort Knox. So as soon as my leave was up, I reported to Fort Knox, and I went before this colonel. And that was an interesting experience. He didn't like the way I had been taught to report to an officer, because at that time I wasn't even a private. And so I reported in, and the first thing he asked me is, what the heck do you know about rockets? I said, I don't know anything about rockets. Well, why are you going to Huntsville? I said, I didn't know I was going to Huntsville, because I didn't have anything telling me that. And so he let me cool it in the barracks there for about 3 days, and my orders came in and the ticket to fly to Huntsville. And from then on, my career was absolutely dictated by people, by programs, by opportunities that I had absolutely nothing to do with.
What unit were you assigned to in Huntsville?
I was in, at that time, the Army had a program called Science and Professional, and you would know about that. It was where basically they had call on anybody in professional fields to put you wherever they needed you, and preferably in your field of study.
That was the 9330 technical
right.
unit?
And because you recall, we had about probably 15 or 20 PhDs. We had about twice that many master degree people, and I guess there was probably a couple of hundred of us with BS degrees. And we all worked just like civilians. I worked in the launching and handling lab just like a civilian. I wore a uniform, pulled KP once in a while. Fortunately, didn't have to do any guard duty. But I worked just like a civilian, which was a tremendous experience for me. And even there, my career took a very interesting turn very early. Even while I was in the Army, I was working for Gaylord Huffman, and we were, there were only 2 of us that were civil servants at the time. We had a number of Chrysler contractors, and we were working for Jim Stamey. And we were in probably one of the first systems engineering offices and organizations, even in DOD. Because we looked all over the country to try to find a template of how to organize and how to perform good systems engineering jobs. So at that time, we had worked on Redstone, and Gaylord and I had our job was to take the Jupiter missile and integrate it with all of the launch site equipment, the portable equipment. We supported, obviously, the early launches at the Cape, and at the time, we were preparing the Jupiter to go to Turkey. And we put together the missile and developed the 15-minute countdown for the Jupiter. At that time, we were competing heavily with Thor, which was our competitor. And at the time, the 15-minute countdown worked for us, and we demonstrated it well ahead of the Thor people getting theirs now.
That's a good accomplishment.
So it was a very good accomplishment. It was great hardware, and it was all designed right there in ABMA with the Von Braun team, and that certainly I learned a lot more electrical. I was a mechanical, didn't even like electrical, but before we finished that job, I knew all 40 pages of every diode, every relay. I knew exactly where it was and what its function was and how to fix it, which was tremendous systems engineering, on-the-job training that I couldn't have gotten anywhere else. So from that point, we soon then turned to become NASA in 1959.
And one day along there, you changed clothes and got a big increase in
That's
salary.
right. And I finished my military in 58, and in 59 we moved into to NASA in December of 59. And I stayed right where I was. I just, like you say, I just changed clothes and just kept on doing exactly the same thing that we were doing. But continue with that path. In launching and handling, the first job we had after we became NASA, and this was started in early '60, we were providing the Atlases and the Thors and launching JPL and Goddard satellites. And that was extremely fun. I went to work for then Frederick Doer. We had the Centaur office and the Agena office, and I was in the Gina office there in the lab. And my job was chief engineer. I was in the project office, but I was a chief engineer and had access to anyone we needed in the labs, which was absolutely great. Our job was to provide the design and implementation interface between the spacecraft and the launch vehicle. It was our job. We bought the launch vehicles from the Air Force. They launched them for us, but it was our responsibility to make sure the satellite got to where it needed to be. And we did all of the early Nimbus weather satellites, which is the precursor for satellites today for Goddard. We did the OAO. We launched on an Atlas. We did the first communication satellite, which was a big balloon called Echo. And then we did all the Ranger and Mariner series for JPL for the precursor to the Apollo, learning about the lunar surface for the Apollo program. During that, we did that from 60 to about 63. We then transferred all of those programs up, the launch vehicle programs, up to what was then Glenn Research Center, or Lewis Research Center. And we spent 2 or 3 months up there in January and February. And
Picked a good time of the year to
which
be
was
there.
a good time for a Southern boy. And they tried to get a lot of us to come over, and but we went at the wrong time of the year to do that. But we came back in 63 after transferring the program to them, and most of us then moved right into the Apollo program. In 63, started working on the second stage of the Apollo, and headed up the engineering and test office in Apollo. So that's kind of a snapshot of the first part of my life and my career. But like I said, the only choices I ever made was, like I say, it's where I went to school, who I married, where I took the first job, and what church I was affiliated with. After that, it was fate, good luck, because every time a job finished in NASA, the same thing was true with ABMA for the short period, but there was always another place, another program for us to move on to, and that's exciting.
Well, you then started in the Apollo.
Right.
How did all that go?
Okay, that was really interesting. The Apollo had just been, the contracts had been let. We were still building the facilities all over the country. At the Cape, I was headed up the engineering and test office in the S2 project office. Rockwell obviously was our contractor. We had to finish building the Seal Beach facility. Our facilities people, we had a very strong facilities organization at the center, because we were building facilities literally all over the nation, both at the center, but as well as around in contractor sites. So we finished building the facility at Seal Beach. We went through the design, development, and test of the S2. It was very complicated. It was the largest LOX hydrogen that we had done at that time. It was we learned a lot. We ended up expending every test article that we had, many before we were ready, even including the facility bird that we were going to ship to the Cape to put in the facility stack. We ended up having to put a substitute stage in there just because we had really literally run out of test hardware. But it was a complicated program. It was a complicated stage, but it was one of the unique things about it that Dr. Reese always worried about was a common bulkhead. That worried him. He just didn't trust common bulkhead between LOX and hydrogen. Interestingly enough, he caught our attention because that was the only piece that never failed. Every vehicle, every stage we failed, the common bulkhead was the only piece that survived. But it worked well, but we worried about it a lot. I worked that, I think we went through a lot of transitions. I think there were 6 project managers just in the time that I was on that stage. And the stage ended up, we had some near misses in the early launches, and I worked that stage through about the first 6 launches, I believe, of the Apollo, and soon after the lunar landing, I moved off and started doing other things. But
where were you during the lunar landing?
I was at home. No, we had already launched, obviously. So
you were there for the launch, though.
We ended up on that one. I was at the Hosk. I didn't have to go to the Cape for that one. So I was actually at home watching it, watching the landing. But that was a very gratifying experience. And needless to say, thousands of us had that same sort of gratification when we saw how successful the landing and the flights up until that. They were all tough.
Very historic event.
Very, very historic, right.
All right, well then, when you left Apollo, what did you do?
Okay, in 69, roughly 70, I went off the Apollo, and at that time, we were just starting into the Phase A and Phase B studies for the shuttle. So I was on the systems engineering team for deciding what the shuttle was going to look like. And we went through the first of the Phase A and Phase B studies and had the fully reusable vehicle that we all really liked. Congress didn't like that one, so we did it a second time, and that's when we came up then with the expendable.
Congress didn't like the cost.
Didn't like the cost. They said we had to limit it to $5 or $6 billion in development cost. So we did that. We reconfigured it, and went through, finished up the Phase B studies in the 71 time frame, and then in early 72, we had already picked the engine. We were picking the contractor for the tank, and the SRBs came right behind that. The orbiter was one of the earlier ones that was contractor was picked. Bob Lindstrom and I co-chaired the SEB for the tank. I had already been picked at that point to be the project manager for the external tank, and that was a very good notion on the part of management for the project manager to be a party to the selection process.
He had to live with the selection.
He had to live with it, and that was good. I highly recommend that for future. But we, Bob and I chaired that, co-chaired that SEB. We had 4 bidders. We had Chrysler, McDonnell Douglas, Boeing, and Martin. Martin was the winning contractor, and was and we were at ground rule the use of the Michoud facility. Mm-hmm. So I got to go through all of the design, development, testing, and early implementation of tooling the plant, which we'd never done in NASA before. NASA has never had that kind of production program. So that was it was very unique in NASA. So that was a lot of learning that a lot of us enjoyed. So I went through the first 6 launches of shuttle as the project manager, and that was then would be about 70. That was 11 years, so it was about 83 when I moved off of the tank. Lindstrom caused me to move off against my objections because he told me the job was getting too easy, and he was right. It was the production machine was running, And I was enjoying it. I would have never left on my own volition. But he set up a manufacturing office in Shuttle then and asked me to run that. And I did that for just a little while. And then they wanted to make some changes in the Hubble telescope. So in '83, I took over the project as project manager of the Hubble telescope. And that was extremely interesting.
That was a real challenge.
It was a real challenge. It was very complicated, but we had some extraordinarily good people at the center working on it. I had good interfaces with JPL, who were providing instruments, and with Goddard, who was going to operate it and also providing instruments. And it was challenging, but it was fun. The thing that really made it interesting was we had about 20 scientists that was on a science working group, and I worked with them very regularly. Every 3 months we would have a meeting with them. Very professional people, very good, and
very individual. However.
Oh, very individuals, very unique individualities. But they were each one was interested in the telescope doing their science, and I listened to every one of them because we had a set of requirements from headquarters that, as far as I was concerned, were stone tablets. That was what Hubble had to do. At the time I took it over, the mirror had been completed. It was in storage, but a lot of the instruments and all of the electronics and the guts and the pointing systems and power systems were still out in subcontracting plants. So at the time I had it, we brought all the hardware from the big optics from PerkinElmer. We shipped to Lockheed Sunnyvale for integration and testing. And we made the whole thing come together. And that was interesting because Lockheed had done a lot of Black World satellites, and they thought this one was just another one like it. And that wasn't the case. One of the biggest challenges I had was getting their attention of how complicated this thing really was to integrate and to test and to verify that it would work. And but we had some the program had suffered severely from lack of people and lack of funding.
Yes.
We added a lot of people at Marshall. We added a lot of people at the contractor places, and we added a lot of money to the program. As a matter of fact, I even got to go to Congress about every other month and explain how we were using the new money. And I did that until they had confidence that we knew what we were doing. And so the oversight of this program was intensive, but it needed to be. It was a real challenge. But to me, it was difficult, but it's probably one of the most gratifying programs that I've ever worked on.
It's one of the greatest things NASA ever did.
Well, I think so, but I'm biased.
I'm biased too, but I agree.
And you should be. After I was on Hubble, I started in '83, and we were going to launch in August of '86, and the Challenger accident happened in January of '86, so it was obvious we weren't going to launch. So, and I had pretty well fulfilled my commitment and was given the opportunity to go be the Director of Science and Engineering at Marshall, which is probably one of the best jobs in the agency. That's a great job because we have so many good labs, so many good organizations, and a lot of just good people. And unfortunately, at the time we were going through the Challenger start back up, the accident start up, but I didn't have to reorganize the labs. I didn't have to make a big change. We were just supporting shuttle. But it was really fun, probably one of the most fun jobs I had, but because I got to spend a lot of time with especially the young people in the labs, and we were bringing a lot of young people in at that point in time, which didn't last very long. But,
a very good thing to do, however.
well, it's a very good thing. And a lot of those good people, I run into people almost every month out there that said, you probably don't remember me, but I was a pip when you were, when you had, and a lot of them are very good people.
Very satisfying.
Very satisfying. So we finished when I was director of S&E for about 2 years, and then they asked me to come to headquarters, which I had avoided all these years, which incidentally, Chuck, is a mistake. I should have gone to spend some time in Washington about mid-career, but I fought it and unfortunately was successful and didn't go until really toward the end of my career. But I went up and took over. I think I was about the third AA for Space Station.
Who was the administrator then?
Beggs was the administrator. And so it was interesting. Spent a lot of time on the Hill, as you would expect, and it was I enjoyed that part of it. I think anybody that's going to be in project management or above ought to spend 2 budget cycles in Washington, just to learn, because you have to learn to respect what they have to put up with up there on a daily basis that we don't have to in the fields. And you understand why you get frantic calls and need data the next hour, because that's the life that so many of them live. So I did that for 2 years, and in '89 I had planned to retire after 30 years, and I had worked 33, so I decided that it was time to retire and go do something. Something
before we leave your NASA career, I'm sure you had interfaces with Werner von Braun and some of his other close associates. Do you have any comments about that experience?
Oh, that's a good question, Chuck. Von Braun, to me, is probably one of the most significant individuals I have ever associated with. I was a young guy, obviously, working on Apollo, and we traveled to the West Coast together frequently. And he was just absolutely remarkable. One time we were coming back. He liked to fly a Learjet, and we had gotten the first Learjet that had leased it out of Nashville, and he and General O'Connor, von Braun flew it out, and O'Connor was flying it back, and it was just the 3 of us. And we were coming back over Kansas, and we were at about 41,000 feet, and we came up on the absolute perfect anvil cloud, which is the one that generates the hail and sleet. And as we flew around that thing, I mean, it was huge, and it was even above us, so we weren't even at the top of it, but we were flying right around near the hail generating tail of it. And the Learjet has this big window in the back, and we were sitting there just looking at that thing because we were flying in perfectly clear air. You could just see this thing off. And he verbally took that anvil cloud and he sliced it vertically and talked to velocities, temperatures, moisture content, wind currents that were happening just within that one cloud. And he sliced it vertically, and then he sliced it horizontal, all this time that we were flying around it. And to this day, I can tell you very accurately how an anvil cloud works, and because he was so articulate, and he loved weather. That and flying were 2 of his hobbies. But he was absolutely remarkable. Here I was probably not even 30 years old at the time, and he took that time to explain that to me just one-on-one. But that was characteristic of him. He liked to do that.
He really did.
When he had time. He also was very articulate in the creation. And that was something that I don't think a lot of people really realize. Bonnie Holmes gave me every speech that he ever gave on science and religion. And he was the most articulate speaker to that subject I have ever heard, and before or since. And he believed, and he was a much more religious person than the average person, and certainly most writers even recognize. But you have to be around him to see that. But he gave those speeches all over the country, and he was absolutely, like I say, the most articulate in the compatibility of science and religion of any person.
We need more of that these days.
Absolutely, we sure do. But he told we were flying out one time, and this time we were on one of the G1s, and we didn't even leave here till like 8 o'clock in the evening, and none of us had had any dinner. There was about 4 of us on the plane, with he and O'Connor, and I forget who the fourth one was, but anyway, we stopped in Kansas City to refuel, and I saw this golf cart over there at the fixed base, and I asked him, I said, would you like to go to the terminal and see if we can find something to eat? Because I knew the restaurant would probably order, because it was after 10 o'clock. He said, that's a good idea. So we got this golf cart and ran over to the terminal. And the restaurant was already closed, but there was a little sandwich bar there. And we sat down at this table. And the lady that was waiting on us, she would come in and she would look at the 4 of us. And she'd keep coming back to Von Braun. And she said, you mind telling me who you are? You look very familiar to me. He said, sure. And he told her. She said, I thought that's who you were. So she picked up this paper napkin, said, would you autograph this for my son? Said he would just be excited. He said, I'd be delighted to do that. And he did. She walked away, and he had this little grin that he was noted for. And he said, you know, once you play the piano in a brothel, everybody knows you. I don't think he spent a lot of time in playing pianos in brothels, but it's a good story.
It's a great story. Well, so you left NASA, and what did you do then?
I had always assumed I had a lot of respect for Norm Augustine, and had worked with his company for many years on the tank.
He was one of my favorite candidates for president. I'd love to see him.
He would have been a good one. He was probably one of the most effective and the most ethical of the corporate leaders that we worked with. And so he told me, he said, if you ever decide to retire, I want to talk to you. And didn't do that, obviously, until I had retired. So I went up and met with he and Kay Hurt, and at that time, they had just won this big support contract at Oak Ridge. And it's like 20,000 people running the Oak Ridge facility. And at that time, DOE was not exactly a growing agency. So I finally figured out they wanted me to go run that operation at Oak Ridge, because that was the closest thing to Huntsville, and I told them I really would like to stay in the Huntsville area. So, but anyway, when I found out what they really wanted, it wasn't nearly as attractive as I thought. So a fellow by the name of Harold Jeffers had a small company here called Applied Research. It was just down the street from where we are now. And he asked me to come to work with him. I interviewed several other people in town, but I came in as president and CEO, and he stayed on as chairman of the board. I did that started in early 90, and in 94 we decided to sell the company and sold it to SAIC, and we just moved about 200 yards down the street, and my agreement was to stay for 3 months to get, we brought about 200 people, and they had about 200 people. So I came in as Bill Gurley's deputy at SAIC, and my commitment was to stay for 3 years till that integration process was completed. And that was up in '97, and I'm still there. I just do consulting with them. It's an interesting company, and it's one I've enjoyed.
Isn't it a employee-owned company?
Mm-hmm. Employee owns all the stock. They're in the process now of selling about 20% of it in the public market, but it'll still be an 80% employee-owned company, and I like that notion. It works well. So that's where I am now, and I still enjoy interfacing out with Marshall. I'm also working part-time with Charlie Pellerin, whom you probably remember.
I remember Charlie.
Charlie has a company called 4D Systems, and we do team building and project leadership development, and we do workshops for them. So I'm Charlie's rep at Marshall, and we've done about 6 or 7 workshops already, and got about 4 or 5 more.
I bet that's fun.
A lot of fun. It's I get to see these new teams that's put together, both in engineering and all of the programs, and we get to work with a lot of those projects, which I just thoroughly enjoy. Seeing these people that haven't had the hardware experience that people like you and I did, having to take on projects and substitute a lot of experience with learning. And
what advice would you give them at this point in your career?
Hang in. The agency has gone through a lot of transition in the last few years. I think Mike is doing a lot of good things of getting the agency back on track from a programmatic standpoint. I think the agency has some great years in front of it. It's fun for me to watch these young people that's really never had a hardware program, to see what's coming, and in many cases they don't realize how tough it's going to be, but that's okay. They'll learn just like we did. But at least they've finally got some hardware programs to go cut their teeth and learn how to perform.
It's a very valuable observation. Any other final thoughts you'd like to leave for the record while we're online here?
No, I think people like ourselves are extremely blessed and fortunate to have had the programs that we had to go from one to another without ever looking for a job. I never really thought about it until about a year or so ago, when we were bidding some work for the government, and I had to sell myself. Hardest thing I've ever done. And I got to thinking, now why is this so difficult? And I realized that from only one time did I interview for a job, that was out of college, and I never interviewed for another job through the rest of my career. And they all just happened. The closest thing to an interview was after I retired. Mm-hmm. But while I hope those times will return, and I think a lot of it will for a lot of the young people, but my counsel is to apply yourself, learn the principles, whether it's engineering, whether it's management, whether it's finance. Learn what makes your program tick, what makes your organization tick, and add your skills to make it tick better. And if you do that, you go home at the end of the day proud of what you've achieved.
Well, that's very good advice. I know you're proud of what you've achieved in your career, and we surely thank you for coming in today.
Thank you for the opportunity.